everyone. Welcome to another episode of Thought Crimes, the podcast where no topics are off limits. If you or I or Jason were able to learn even one thing today, I think we've accomplished our mission. So today we will be talking about one of the sexiest, most exciting topics out there, and that is taxes. We all know tax season's coming. So we thought, what better time of the year to talk about how amazing taxes are? So Jason, just before we begin, what is new with you?
Well, this week was a week of work, my friend. It we're making great strides on getting this off the ground, and other than that, it was just keep plugging away at all the projects. So pretty standard week this one. How about you?
I actually managed to take a few days off with my wife, and we pretty much worked around the house. The rest of the world is very exciting right now with all the lockdowns and/or restrictions. So we started or kept doing work around the house. As you know, we had redone the kitchen before Christmas. Now we're redoing the entrance because the entrance probably the weak spot in our house. It's pretty small, nowhere for someone to sit down, put their shoes, stuff like that. So if you're two, it's a crowd. So kind of strip the closet out and redoing an entrance there with a bench and some hooks and shoe rack and all that stuff. So it's going well. And other than that, yeah, that's not much. We're working on this podcast, and we're excited to share some tax knowledge on you guys.
I really like this episode because we're not going to be too number heavy on it. The idea is just really to piss people off and make them understand just how badly they're getting fleeced, and
Yeah,
hopefully just take the wool off your eyes a little bit.
just before we started recording here, Jason and I were talking. We're just saying, no matter how you feel about taxes, whether or not you vehemently oppose all of them, some of them, you like taxes or you want the government to tax even more, which I don't know why you would want that, but let's say you're heavy into that. I still think it's weird that anyone would still be excited for taxes. So we're going to try to make this topic more exciting, but also here to kind of financially red pill you a little bit, or just a reminder of like what taxes are, how much you're getting taxed, what kind of taxes exist, and at the end of the day, what comes off of your paycheck.
All right, man. I
So,
like it. So how do you want to lead
so,
this one off?
so you can get started. You can give us a few, for the audience here, a few basic definitions of taxes or tax adjacent things, and then I'll kick it off after that with the bit of the Canadian history of taxation, at least.
Right, cool. Yeah, and that's something to note too. Is we're doing this in a Canadian context. We
Yeah.
both live in Canada, but pretty much anywhere in the Western world, you're looking at roughly the same idea.
And for our American friends, don't worry, don't change the channel of the podcast. We have a few stats for the U.S. as well. So
First thing, what's a tax? A tax is a compulsory financial contribution imposed by law to raise government revenue. So essentially, pay us or else we send you to jail. that's, that's pretty well it. You work, give me some or else. And the whole
yeah,
idea of that is that government has a variety of programs that they have to fund. Where they're going to get the funds, they can either incur debt or that they can raise receipts from the people. And often we see a bit of both.
and let's be clear here: taxes are not new. They were there during during feudal times. It was something that was imposed on people or certain classes of people or types of people for a very long time.
Right. And I think that was one of the big things with the American Revolution was taxation without representation.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case there, and you're the history buff here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially they were paying a tax to the crown in Great Britain, but didn't have a say in how their colony was being governed.
Yeah, correct. And they started getting taxed on imports and products and things like that. And until you had one of the starting events was the Boston Tea Party, when they were super angry and started dumping an entire boatload of tea into the water
Tasty.
at the docks there, as a somewhat peaceful form of rebellion. You
Mostly
actually
peaceful protest, right?
Yeah, Yeah, funny enough, you had several members of parliament and thinkers back in England who opposed the taxation and what was being imposed on the American people because of that principle, right? The whole classical liberal idea is that you had representation. That was kind of the beauty or the nice part of a democratic system slash taxation, but that wasn't happening in a fair way with overseas across the pond. So I know you do have thinkers like Edmund Burke, great father of conservatism, who I know opposed and said, you know, uh, if you keep doing this, it's not going to end well. And he was right.
Yeah. Up next, we have a tariff. Tariff and duty is essentially the same thing. It's a charge or a list of charges imposed by a government on imports or exports. So essentially, what they're trying to do there is protect the manufacturing ability of their country by limiting the amount of goods being brought in.
We we saw a renewed talk on that in the last several years with Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah, aluminum was a big one there
Yeah,
for
that
a
was a big
while.
one. Yeah.
And then lastly, a fee. So a fee is a payment for a service or a particular privilege. I think when you apply for a passport, it's last time I did mine, it was $160 for a 10-year passport. Or when you renew your driver's license, or when you renew your car registration. It
Expensive paper, or pieces of plastic.
and it's all these things that started out being free or being essentially just a nominal charge just to say there's a charge. But fees are, in my opinion, are really insidious ways to to continue to increase taxes. I'll use an example here in New Brunswick. So every year we have to register our vehicle. Don't ask me why, but every single year you have to fill out the papers. They send you a little sticker and you put it on your license plate. I mean, you could easily do it once when you buy the vehicle, and then that's it. It's registered to the province. They know you have it. And then when you either sell the vehicle or get rid of it, then you could, just kind of
Remove. Yeah.
close that account.
Yeah.
So we now have a conservative government in office here in the province, and to look kind of to appease people with the expenses to their vehicle. Not only do we have to register a vehicle every year, but we also have to get it inspected every year. So when you go and get your vehicle inspected, you bring it to a garage, they check it over and make sure it's safe for the road. So both those things, the registration and the inspection, had to be done annually. Now, what the government did is kept the registration annually, but made the inspection every 2 years. So that was kind of a ploy to say, hey, look, you're saving money. You don't have to get your car inspected every year. But what's more important, Will, in your opinion? Getting a new flashy sticker put on my car every year just to tell the government that, hey, I still own this car, or having it inspected for road safety?
I would go with the latter. Yes. Is
Yeah.
that the correct answer?
I would say so. So, but think about it, right? So they protected government receipts by keeping that same fee, but reduce the burden on people by having their car be less safe, essentially. And they also reduced revenue for small businesses and the garages.
Right. Who knows though? Maybe I don't know if I don't know if there's been studies on this, but maybe they studied that the cost benefit analysis, right? That within 2 years, not enough accidents occur due to lack of inspection. I don't know,
Maybe.
but
All right, so that's it. So that's a tax, that's a tariff, and that's a fee.
cool.
Will, I think you wanted to touch on the history of taxation in Canada.
Yeah, just real quick here. So very, very kind of for Canadians and people listening outside of Canada, they'll kind of smile here and say, yeah, Canada would have this kind of tax history. So the first recorded tax in Canada appeared around 1650, and this was a tax levied on the residents of New France, of Nouvelle France. The first form of tax was an export tax, and that was on pelts and hides. So they started taxing 50% of all beaver pelts. So that's a boatload of beaver.
That's
Uh,
that's also a very steep tax.
exactly. And 10% of moose hides. So those were the first kind of forms of organized taxation in Canada centuries ago. Today, of course, we have various methods, and we'll talk about that. Something to note just before we jump to the 20th century here, where we really have the modern income tax coming in, is that in 1867 we have the Constitution Act, so the BNA Act, the British North American Act. It gave Parliament unlimited taxing powers. So just to keep that in mind, um, as we go along, and we're going to try to maybe showcase some kind of a trend here. Um, but anyways, jumping to the 20th century, uh, this is where you really see today's forms of taxes appear. Often you'll see taxes increase, and I'll be highlighting these in a few minutes, but tax increases or tax creation often occurs around what you would call something like a national emergency. So, yes, you may have guessed it. World War One is when Canada first introduced personal income tax and corporate taxes. And then in 1920, not long after that, the manufacturer sales tax and other types of sales tax were also introduced. And yes, you might have guessed it, they were never uh, they were never removed. So we still have the introduction of this tax as of over 100 years ago now. Um, and I'll show a few trends in a moment, but the trends, as as you'll note, both I have some graphs up for Canada and the United States. Both both income taxes were introduced during World War One for both countries, and they were increased severely during World War One, increased severely during World War Two. Of course, there are fluctuations after those kinds of things. And then if you look at the United States in the 60s with Vietnam, you have taxation growing again, and it only starts going down in the 80s, more in the Reagan era, who was truly a fiscal conservative, and tried to highly reduce taxes in America.
So you had
Uh,
essentially a whole generation, a whole lifetime of just seeing taxes increase, increase, increase to the point of you really don't have a whole lot of spending power left. Before the show,
right.
you were telling me that was it in World War II that the highest tax bracket in the U.S. was something around 94%?
Yeah. So if we look at the historical highest marginal income tax rate, so that's the highest income tax for the top earners of the country. So there's always so the federal government will have a categories, as Jason will go through in the Canadian context. But the highest earners at one point in World War II were taxed up to 94% in America. 94%, 1944, 1945, which again makes sense in those historical emergency trends where middle of World War II, the USA is really by 1944 putting all of its effort into the war on both fronts. Therefore, you have the taxes increasing a lot.
Right. It's not the kind of thing that's sustainable, obviously, because if you try to maintain that after wartime, people are either just not going to work or find ways to get around it.
Yeah, and important to note here that typically, I guess depends what kind of school of thought you're in, but there is a just middle, right, of taxation. You can't tax people too high, or they won't be productive, or they'll leave, or they'll find loopholes, and you can't tax, or maybe having not enough tax brings no revenue generation to your country. Now, just before I finish here with the trends and pass it back to Jason, um, to show the kind of shift in taxation within Canada is quite interesting. So if we compare basically 100-year difference, if we look at 1917, there were zero. So right before the income tax was introduced, there were the revenue source of the federal government was zero income taxes, zero goods and services taxes, zero energy taxes, and zero employment insurance premiums. They had about 5% was the corporate income tax, 10% was other taxes and duties, 26% other revenue, and the main revenue for the federal government at almost 60% was customs import duties. If we flip 100 years to 2016 data, the bulk of the federal revenue comes from personal income tax at 50%. So just to give you a kind of idea of the flip in how the federal government used to and now makes its money. So I'll stop at that, and I'll pass it back to Jason.
Well, what I find interesting with that is when you're generating most of your revenue from import duties, it's almost a defensive kind of nationalistic measure because you're incentivizing people to buy local or at least within the borders of their country and import as little as possible because that's where they pay that duty. Um, in a resource rich country like Canada, it actually makes sense because you have so much to work with. We have essentially every mineral. I think we have the most fresh water in the world. We have more lumber than
Hmm.
we know what to do with, and a ton of oil. So it makes sense to set it up that way because you're going to incentivize your people to work with what they already have
Yeah, I can for comparison, the custom import duties as of 2016 in Canada were 1.8%.
compared to 58% on 100 years before.
Yeah,
And it's not that you're taxed at 1.8% or paying a duty of 1.8%. It's the total amount of dollars that the country is raising. 1.8% of those comes from those import duties today,
yeah,
essentially, and more than half of the government's receipts came from those duties 100 years prior.
correct. So,
Okay.
Jason, do you want to give us maybe a quick rundown on I guess, a case study on an average Canadian? What are their taxes, and how much are they taxed on average?
Yeah, so I just put together a little thing, and I know over audio it's hard to kind of keep track of the numbers, so I'm going to make it really basic and really simple.
Paint us
But
a beautiful picture, Bob Ross.
get some little happy trees. I actually never watched
Some
Bob
money
Ross.
trees. I would love. What?
I actually never watched Bob Ross. Like,
Oh, really?
was it on when we were kids?
Yeah, it was always like on one of those lesser watched kind of local channels,
Like a
and he looked like a kind of like a hippie. He had the fro going and his little palette, and then he'd just paint some trees and mountains and stuff like that.
I did a lot.
Pretty good on the spot. Like, he's a pretty talented guy.
No, for sure.
And now
Uh,
he's become a very popular costume trend for Halloween, if you've noticed.
yeah, he's passed away since. Eh?
You know what? I have no idea. Don't quiz me about Bob Ross.
Yeah,
I don't
no.
know.
And I was just thinking, I was confused there for a second because I was thinking Mister Rogers and Mister Dress Up because those are the ones I watched when I was younger. I think you
Yeah,
did too.
Mr. Yeah, I love Mr. Dress Up. He did pass away. Yeah.
And I think one was Canadian, the other one was American, but it was basically the same show.
Yeah, I know. Mr. Dress Up was Canadian. He was on CBC for years. I
So
used to be impressed. What I found really impressive, I used to love to draw and artwork when I was a kid. And he always took a permanent marker, like those big classic permanent marker with a massive tip on it. And he used to just freehand, like, draw these amazing but simple drawings. And I was there struggling with my lead pencil, erasing like 1,000 times. And I was like half decent at drawing, I'd say, when I was a kid. But that always impressed me. Especially I'm left-handed, so anything with a marker ends up looking pretty shitty. Just
that's
rub my hand everywhere.
that's true. You are a good artist. So I remember like when we were kids, like we had to like color stuff. Like you always turned in good work.
Thank you. I'm glad you remember that.
That's a hidden talent of yours. All right, we're doing taxes, right?
Yeah, taxes.
Okay. All
If
right. All right.
someone tunes in halfway through, they're like, "I thought this was taxes." Yes,
Um,
tax season, Jason. Tax season.
all right. So I went through Canadian government website and I pulled out some average numbers. So what I'm gonna be working with today is that the average income for a single person between the ages of 35 and 44 years old is 60,100. So we'll dumb it down even more than that. We'll say your average 40-year-old is making 60K a year.
Can I make a interjection here, or it's a question?
Sure.
I just want to make something specify something. Are you talking about an average or a median, Jason?
In this, I knew you were going with that one.
Mr. Pedantic.
Average in this case, so it is more
Okay.
sensitive to the extremes.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, for those who missed last episode, Jason made sure to specify the difference between what an average is and a median. Average taking into account the extremes on both ends. So very, very low earners and very, very high earners. Then
Right.
divide the number of Canadians, and you've got your average.
Right. So the median income is probably less than 60,000 for that same age group, but
Right.
we'll use the average, which it works for the numbers. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about income tax. So you go to work, you make your 60K a year, but you don't get to keep that 60K. So wherever you live in Canada, you're going to be paying federal income tax. And it varies between 15% and 33%. And you have what are called tax brackets. So a tax bracket is from dollar number one to dollar number X, you're going to be taxed so much. And then when you make a little bit more than X, X plus one, now you're in a different bracket. So on the federal level, your first $48,000 are taxed at 15%. Your 48,000 first dollar is going to be taxed at 20%. So that's what you call your marginal tax rate. It's your next dollar is going to be taxed at how much. And then that goes all the way up to 33%. So for anyone making over $214,000 in Canada, all of those dollars after 214,000 are taxed at 33%. So it's not your entire income that's taxed at 33%. It's only the dollars that you made above 214.
And I think it's safe to say that most Western countries operate that way, correct?
Yeah, it's about the same idea everywhere as you go in the Western world. The and what that does is it taxes your higher earners more than your lower earners, which kind of makes sense. Maybe the amount that they're being taxed, that's up for debate, but it makes sense that you'll tax your higher earners more than your lower earners.
Right.
So the example that we're going to use is someone living in Ontario, because not only is there federal income tax, but each province and territory also has their own setup for provincial taxes. And it's the exact same idea as the federal taxes, where you have your brackets where your lower dollar is going to be taxed at a certain amount. And as you go up and up and up, the marginal tax rate is going to increase as you go into the next bracket and the next bracket. So Ontario, actually, it's one of the more generous provinces for taxation. Where I live in New Brunswick, it's a lot steeper. We'll quickly compare the two just to give you an idea. But for this example, we're going to stick to Ontario.
Yeah, and Ontario, being by far the most populated province, sorry, in Canada.
Exactly. So Ontario, the tax brackets go from 5% all the way up to 13%. So your first 44,000 is going to be taxed at 5%. Anything you make above 220,000 is taxed at 13%. In New Brunswick, though, our tax rate goes from 9.8% to 20%.
Mm.
Um, so if we look here, our second tax bracket, which is 43,000 to 54,000, is taxed at 14%. That is higher than the highest tax bracket in Ontario. So
Right.
New Brunswick, the second tax bracket, is already more than the highest tax bracket on Ontario. So if you're making
Which
50,000 in New Brunswick, your provincial tax rate is higher than someone making 250 in Ontario.
which is curious because New Brunswick is not a very rich province on average.
Well, that's why they have to do it. New Brunswick, when I was doing the research for this, and yesterday I was kind of poking through some articles, and it was each province's dependency on transfers from the federal government. New Brunswick is something like I forget now, but it's like over half of our income was dependent on federal
Federal payments,
transfers. So that's why we need to generate even more income from the population because we're just flat broke.
yeah. Mm.
Okay, so let's go back to our example. You're a 40-year-old making 60,000 living in Toronto. What that means in real dollars?
So you can rent like a tiny condo.
A tiny condo, like a shoebox at best. Actually,
Yeah.
condos are becoming more affordable right now because
Well,
you're
they're
seeing
they're building them so much too.
it's not just that, is that people are moving out and coming to the smaller cities.
Right.
I like where I live here in Moncton, house prices have almost doubled in the last 18 months. And there was a report that came out that condos, especially in the big metropolitan areas, especially Toronto, have actually deflated a little bit. So something that would have been, say, $4,000 a month in rent is probably 36 right now.
Right. It makes sense. I mean, if you look at the last 10 years in Toronto, condos have just exploded. It's pretty insane. But if you also, yes, look at the COVID trend or the trend of the last couple of years, and COVID, I guess, has accelerated that, is the de-urbanization exodus, right? You've got quite a few people moving, not necessarily to the country. Some are, but others are maybe moving provinces or states. You see that in with LA and New York to the south of us. But a lot of people are moving to smaller cities, at least, or
Right.
towns.
And especially where you have the option in a lot of cases to work from home.
Right.
Let's say I'm living in a house or even a condo in Toronto, and it's valued at 800,000. Well, I can sell that, and if I want to buy something else in Toronto, if if I want to keep any of those dollars, I'm going to have to lower my standard of living. So it's either going to be a worse location or a smaller place. But if I
Right.
move to a place like, say, Fredericton in New Brunswick, well, a home might only cost me 600 or 200,000. I'll keep 600,000, and I don't have the same traffic. I don't have the same headaches, and I have a generally better quality of life.
Yeah. It all depends what you want. But you and I had chatted recently. Would you rather be a small fish in a big pond or a bigger fish in a small pond? So
I'll take big fish in a small pond every day.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so to get back to our example, that person making 60K in Ontario is going to pay 15,900 in income tax, which is an average of 26%. So just right off the top, all the hours, all the strife and the difficulty and the headaches you had to deal with going to work, without question, 26% of it is going straight to the government. Let's say you want to work overtime now. You're like, okay, 45,000, almost 46,000 that's remaining isn't enough. So what am I going to do? I'm going to work overtime. Well, your next dollar, your marginal tax rate is at 29%. So even as you work, you're already now in a higher tax bracket. So more dollars are going out. Yes, you're making more, but a smaller percentage of those dollars you actually get to keep.
Right.
But it doesn't stop there, right? So you can't just work. Like, why do you
Oh,
work?
there's more.
Oh, but wait, there's more. It's
Do
like a
tell, Jason.
it's like a ShamWow commercial.
Yeah.
All right, so you got
We all
46.
know. We all know how that guy ended up.
What happened to him again?
Didn't he stab a guy?
Oh yeah,
Wasn't it the ShamWow guy? I don't know. He's a. I think it's him. He ended up being a criminal or something.
wasn't
I thought
there
he
one who
killed
had
him.
a stroke on a plane? But I don't think
I
it's a
don't know.
ShamWow guy. I think it's another one of them.
There's a few of the infomercial guys that are just like they end up having a weird, sketchy legacy.
Like, how do you even become an infomercial guy?
I don't know. You have that sketchy appeal to you. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like extroversion dialed up to 11. It kind of
Yeah,
it's a sort of charisma, but it's like a used car salesman charisma, so you
yeah,
know they're scamming you.
yeah.
It's really weird.
And speaking of sales, your next one's sales tax, right?
Oh, well done. Okay, so you have where was I at? You have $46,000 left over from your 60,000, but you have to buy stuff. Well, similar to the income tax, sales tax. So when you buy something, there's both a federal rate and a provincial rate. So the straight Canadian rate is 5%. So whenever you buy something for $1, you're going to have to pay an extra 5 cents to the government. So your bill's automatically going to be $1.05. But the provinces also do the same thing. Ontario has an 8% sales tax. So when you combine the federal with the provincial, you're looking at 13%. And as an aside, New Brunswick is 10%. So us, when you combine them together, it's 15. So there too is also a higher rate.
Right.
All right. So um, you have to live. So you went to work, but you still have to buy food. You still have to buy clothing. You have to buy gas to put in the car. You have to buy all these things. So you're going to be taxed an extra 13% on all of your purchases. So what does that look like? When I was poking around, it said that the average tax bill for someone living in Ontario is $5,800. So that's only what they're paying in sales tax. It's not the actual price of the goods. Where that kind of didn't make sense to me is that to pay that much in sales tax, you have to buy $44,000 worth of stuff.
Hmm.
But you only had $46,000 left over from the income tax.
Right.
So
And is this per household or individual?
This was per household. So,
Okay,
we're
so
kind of, we're
right,
not following a nice straight line of it's exactly this person the whole way through. And it's like we said at the outset, we're more looking to give you an idea of how much just how
right.
much is getting taken from you.
I mean, you could still say best case scenario. Let's say it's a two-person household, so you calculated the individual tax, but the sales tax you could combine with two people. That's still that's still not. It doesn't leave you with that much money.
Right. So even if you chop this one in two and call it 3,000 instead of 58,000, you'd be left with roughly $15,000 after your income
Your
tax and your
expenses,
sales tax.
right?
All right. So we have a running total so far of about 33%. So you take your 60,000 and you minus the 14,000 that you put into uh, income tax, the extra 6,000 that you put into sales tax, you're left with two-thirds of what you started with. Sure, you bought some goods and services, but still one-third of all your money that you made, that you worked for, just went to the government because reasons. So there's another thing. You own a home. So Will, you own a house.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you like paying property taxes?
I love it, especially when I'm paying mortgage every month. It's just it's a cherry on top.
Uh, we both bought homes last year, and I was thinking about that when I was going through the mortgage proceedings and all that. And I don't really own my house. Like, even if I would pay my mortgage, well, what happens if I don't pay my property taxes? Like, do I really own the house, or does the government own the house and I'm essentially leasing the parcel from them?
Right. Like you mean even if you end up paying your entire mortgage, so the bank is out and you own your house if you choose or cannot afford your to pay your income tax sorry your property tax that year, do you own it? That's your question.
That's my question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So maybe just something to keep in mind.
Right.
All right. So in Ontario, the average property value is just under 600,000, and your average property tax in Ontario is about 1%. So you're looking at about $6,000 worth of property tax that you're paying every year. And again, there's going to be some that's higher, some going to be lower. We're just kind of broad stroking it for this year one. So what's our running total at after you make your 60,000? You take off your income tax, you take off your sales tax, and you take off your property tax. Right now, you're being taxed at 43% of your income. So far, so good.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, there's more. Call now and we'll double your offer. You'll
Yes.
notice you'll notice though that if you look at your pay stub, and this is assuming that you work a job and you're not an entrepreneur, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. You'll also have various social securities. So you'll have your employment insurance premiums and you'll have your Canada Pension Plan premiums. And what these are is social safety nets that you're paying into, that the government is saying that if you give us these dollars in times of need, we will be able to take care of you. So it's a very socialist policy to begin with. And they're also saying that they can make a better choice of investing your dollars than you can. Essentially, that's kind of the le sous-entendu of that.
Right. Right.
So as an employee, when you combine your Canada Pension Plan and your EI premiums, you're looking at about 7% that you're paying into there. Pretty high, but is what it is. Nothing you can do about that one. But there's also certain things that are taxed just as a incentive also. So you'll notice if you do a little bit of research, if you look into things like cigarettes, things like alcohol, gamblings like scratch tickets, that sort of thing, the cost that you're paying is mostly a variety of taxes. And the idea here is to disincentivize the consumption of things that are deemed harmful. What I find strange with that is that if a tax is an incentive, so it's supposed to make you not want to buy liquor and tobacco and scratchers because it's bad for you. Well, why am I paying income tax? Why am I paying property tax? Will that not disincentivize me to work? Will that not disincentivize me to purchase a home if a tax is also an incentive?
That's a good question.
So you got a bunch of stuff, right? You got liquor, tobacco, and amusement. You also have fuel taxes, vehicle taxes, carbon taxes, natural resource taxes, and import duties. Just when I was doing the research, is kind of like the average that someone will pay in Ontario and all these things.
Also, let's be honest here. You could argue that kind of morally and socially, the cigarette taxation has been a thing, right, to try and disincentivize. Whether or not it has worked, it's at least something that's in the minds of most of the public. But something like alcohol, I think the government knows very well that you know alcohol is going nowhere. In fact, it's growing. The microbreweries are growing. It's just kind of a new tax revenue for them because it's definitely not a. Anyways, they're not there to stop people from drinking or
No,
buying wine.
no. And yesterday when I was driving around, I I heard a reportage that said through COVID in New Brunswick, alcohol sales were up 20% over year.
They're up everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I remember last year when I bought my house, I had a bunch of renovations to do. And what I was doing, the buddies came over and we were working away, and I provided the food and the beer. When I was buying a 2-4 of a certain beer, it was $37. Today it's $40. Not even a year later, so you're already looking at a like 8% increase on just that one product in 1 year, and
yeah.
that's essentially all tax.
Hmm.
Okay, so where's our running total at? You made your 60K, you paid your income tax, you paid your sales tax, you paid your property tax, and then all the others and the premiums and that sort of thing. Well, you are left with 29,300. So from 60,000, you're down to 29,000. You paid 51% of all the dollars that you made went just to taxes. Like, this is not the goods and services also, because for to pay sales tax, you also have to buy something, right? So it's not like you're in the green of or in the black of 29,000. You still had to live. You still had to buy your food, your clothing, your shelter, your mortgage payment, all your bills, your utilities, and that's what you have left to work with. But half of everything that you did just went to the government. So half of all your labor just went straight to the federal and provincial coffers.
And how do you feel about that, Jason?
I think you know.
I couldn't tell. One thing I'll say too about sales tax, if you're trying to save money and you're really trying to get ahead with your future and maybe eventually create a passive income or invest intelligently, uh, sales tax is, I guess, an easy way to show discipline. Because don't forget, everything you work for, you get taxed on. Then once you get that money, if you want to buy something, that thing is taxed as well. So whenever you think of buying something, think twice. Do I really need this? Or should it be going to something that might benefit me in the long run? So, yes, we all need food, we all need clothing, we all need that kind of stuff. But when you're thinking of buying toys, fun things, trinkets, whatever it may be, think twice because technically you're double taxed on it.
Right. And it might also be a question of lowering your standard of living. If you're living in too much house, sell it and downsize. If you're living in an apartment and you can stand a roommate, well, there you go. You're splitting the bill. There's ways to minimize, but you know, it's frustrating that you have to go to that extent just to make up for the greed of the managing class or the ruling class.
Right. So just to finish up on your average spending of a Canadian here, stat to finish. In 2014, Canada had the 13th highest combined tax rate within the top 36 industrialized countries. As of 2018, Canada is now seventh. So, top seventh in the world or industrialized countries.
Yeah, seventh most tax of the industrialized world.
Correct.
Okay, so
So,
where do you want to take it from here?
Well, let's just talk a little bit maybe about government spending today. What's the trend? What are the priorities? So with all the revenue they've gotten from its population, again, half of it from being from income tax, what do they spend it on or are planning to spend it on?
Okay. Do you want to lead the way on that one, or do you want me to kind of shoot some things out?
Go for it. You had the let's go the last full fiscal year, so 2019, 2020, and maybe I can just add on what the trends are looking like now that we have even more debt due to COVID or COVID measures.
Right. And Will and me are looking at the Government of Canada website, so it's straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, it's the
In
Treasury Board.
in 2019, 2020, the most expensive item in Canada was old age security. The government spent 56 billion on old age. That was up from 53 billion the year before, and is projected in 2021 to go up to 62 billion. So an increase of about 8% just in 1 year, right there. After that, we have the Canada Health Transfer. So that's the transfer to the provinces for their healthcare system, 40 billion. And then we have the fiscal arrangements with the territory, so the redistribution from Ottawa to the provinces coming in at 32 billion. Now, essentially, what you're looking at, the top three are social transfers. They're socialist policies that say, okay, we're going to create a safety net to help our citizenry in one way or another. Now, whether it actually achieves that, we'll keep that for another day. But that's kind of the idea behind that. The one that worries me here is the one that comes in fourth place, and it's the market debt and foreign reserves management coming in at just under 24 billion. So that means 24 billion is just going to debt management, debt service, essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of like Canada is a compulsory shopper and not using their credit cards very wisely. Um, if we look just to finish off here at the projected estimates of 2021, 2022, very similar trend to what Jason just highlighted. We have at number one, Employment and Social Development Canada at 47.07 billion. Department of Finance Canada, so Canada Health Transfer, 43 billion. Department of Finance, fiscal equalization, so transfer to the provinces, 20.1 billion. And then we have in fourth place, same thing, interest on immature debt, 15.47 billion. And these are projections. I would probably put money on the fact that the projections are lowballed. So, yeah. We also have other interest costs at 5.5 billion. So, yeah, lots of debt management, which, yes, is a little worrisome.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this on all of our different podcasts. It seems like we always come back to debt and taxes and fiscal management to some degree. And the reason we put so much time on this is that it's not something that's sustainable. When you look at a country, just think of a house. Like, Will, you just use the analogy of the credit card, but sure, a country's more complicated, but it's the same idea. You can't spend more than what you bring in. So if you're, well, you get the idea. But on top of that, if you're taxing your people and you're paralyzing your people, well, they have no incentive to be productive. So not only are you spending more than you're earning, but you're not creating the means to earn more to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Or the motivation or the interest or the payoff for someone to put extra work or sacrifice.
Yeah, and I I don't mind a sales tax because a sales tax is a choice. I'm choosing to buy something. I'm vehemently opposed to an income tax. I think that's just theft. I think that's criminal because people have to work, and if you do not pay your income tax, you are going to jail. So the government is saying that we own part of your labor. So no matter what, you are working in part for the government. And sure, you're benefiting in part with, and the example is always, well, do you want roads? Of course I want roads. But all the dollars are not going to infrastructure. They're going to a ton of stuff that you don't have control over, Like, do you want your tax dollars being sent overseas to donations? Do you want them to fund all these programs? And then it's
Yeah,
with your
lots of
it's your
programs.
values, right? And just government bureaucracy and the bloating state. And you look at the salaries that the federal government pay, even compared to the private sector. A secretary in the federal government is going to be making well over $50,000 a year. A secretary in the private sector is probably making 36. So, and that comes from taxing productive people.
And on top of that, do you feel happy and comfortable to the fact that a pretty big percentage of the taxes that are coming off of each Canadian is going to manage our debt? So it's highly non-productive payment. It's we're not getting anything out of this except managing debt that has been steeply been increasing over the past 5 years.
Right. So let's end it on a positive note. What's some
Yeah.
strategies for tax mitigation? Now you can't avoid taxes. Tax evasion is illegal. That's when you go to jail. But you can mitigate your taxes. So, Will, do you want to touch on some things, and maybe I'll go a little bit deeper in it after?
Sure. Yeah, you noted a few good strategies here on basically how you can get your money to work for you, and at the same time, how do you get some of your money to possibly avoid being taxed? So we have here the TFSA, the tax-free savings account, and I'll let you go into that. We also have the RRSP, and last but not least, and we'll finish with that. We just want to mention one of our favorite finance books. It's a very simple read, and that's Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and we'll talk about the Kiwasaki quadrants.
All right. So, a TFSA, the tax-free savings account, is something that was introduced by the Harper government. And the idea there is that it's essentially a savings vehicle that the profits that you make within that vehicle will not be taxed. And every year there's an extra chunk that you're allowed to put in, and it keeps going up year after year after year. So within a TFSA, you could put just a regular savings account. But thing is, right now interest rates on a saving account are about 0.5% at best. So you're not even keeping up with inflation.
Right.
Not really a good use of a TFSA. Not financial advice, but just my opinion. Then you could put a mutual fund inside of a TFSA. Let's say you put a Canadian dividend fund through your bank that you deal with. Okay, well, now the mutual funds say it's growing, growing, growing. There's dividends, and it grows from $10,000 to $12,000. Well, when you sell that and you take out the proceeds, you won't be taxed on that extra 2,000 that you made because it was within a TFSA. And there's a whole bunch of rules that we won't get into, but it's an intelligent way to grow your dollars without being taxed on the profits that you
Right.
make.
And oftentimes, if you dabble a bit in stock trading, this is where you should do it as well within a TFSA.
Right. And personally, I do have my trading account within a TFSA. I try to
Same.
focus a lot on dividend paying companies, and the dividends count as income, but when it's within a TFSA, it counts as the profits within the TFSA, so the dividends are tax exempt.
Right.
Next up, RRSP, so Registered Retirement Savings Plan. It's in the States, I think it's an IRA and a Roth IRA is essentially the same idea. So what you do here is you're just putting money aside for retirement, and it's what you call a deferred income fund. So deferred income means that you're not taxed now, you're taxed when you withdraw it later. So the idea is that when you're younger and paying into it, so in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you're most likely making a higher salary than what you'll be expected to withdraw in retirement. So your marginal tax rate is going to be higher when you're working than when you're retired. So let's say we'll take our example of 60,000 earlier, and there's limits on how much you can put in. We won't dive into that either. But let's say for easy math, you put in $5,000 this year into an RRSP. Well, instead of being taxed on that 60,000 that you earned, you're only going to be taxed on 55,000. And then that 5,000 that you put into the RSP will be taxed when you withdraw it, say in your 60s or 70s or whatever. So, do you want to talk about business?
Sure. Sure. I mean, just like Fate of Empires, which came out last week, you introduced me to this guy. I had heard of the book before, but I had never actually read it. And you said, "Will, like, yeah, I highly recommend you just get this a version of this book and read it." And it's called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it basically teaches you to make your money work for you, you not work for money. And he talks a lot about passive income, right? uh, Finding ways where your money can either grow, and if not, it can do other things like pay you dividends or rent or things like that. So do you want to talk a little bit about the Kiwasaki Quadrant?
Right. So, again, we were not going to go super deep, but it's just kind of to give you an idea that not everything has to be done the way you're taught to do things. So, the example that we used the whole way through with the person living in Ontario making $60,000 a year, it was always in the context of an employee. So, it's always someone going to work, exchanging hours for dollars, and those dollars being taxed. But when you're a business owner, the taxation scheme is different. So when you earn income, when you work, you trade hours for dollars, you you earn your money, you pay your taxes, and then you're allowed to spend the rest. When you're a business owner, which is one of the quadrants of Kiyosaki, you earn the business income, you pay your expenses, and then you're taxed on the profit afterwards. So when you're the four quadrants are ESBI. You have the employee, the self employed just below it. You have the business in the top right, and you have the investor in the bottom right. And the idea is that you want to journey from the top left quadrant of an employee down to the bottom left of the self employed, up to the top right of the business owner, and down to the bottom right of the investor. And as you journey through these quadrants, the tax scheme is more and more favorable to you. So why is that important? Well, there there's a whole lot of stuff. You have a lot more strategies to use your money effectively. If you can create a profitable business, you now you're also working for yourself. So if we get away from the whole dollars and taxes and all this stuff, you're working for your own ideal. You're working for your own ends. And obviously, not everyone can do that right from the get go, but maybe you'll start something small. Maybe you're a crocheter and you can sell things online, and then
Right.
eventually you'll become self employed. Get a little business number. Maybe you'll
Yeah,
hire.
guys, knitting's the new gold mine,
Knitting's a new
the new
gold
gold
mine.
rush. Yeah.
Maybe then you'll hire someone and teach them how to do it, and you'll pay them a salary, and they'll be taxed at right after their income. But now everything that you sell that they made is now business income. And when you pay yourself as a business owner, you'll pay a dividend, and dividends are taxed different than straight income. And we can put all that aside for how they're taxing that, but it's just to give you an idea that the goal is don't work for your money, make your money work for you, and try to snake your way through a channel where you're going to be in a more favorable tax situation. And that seems to be, at least today, is to be a business owner.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good place to end it. It's really something to think about. We can also share the quadrant on our social media, and or you guys are just welcome to Google it. It's pretty easy to find the Kawasaki quadrants, and you'll be able to visualize it there. But yeah, no, I think it's a good place. And I hope we got everybody really excited and pumped for tax season. So think of us whenever you're filing your taxes in the next few weeks. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. This has been another episode of Thought Crimes, and you can find our page on locals.com at that Thought Crimes podcast, and anywhere where podcasts are streamed. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, everyone.